Hello everyone. This is going to be my first official YouTube upload. For those that don't know me from Twitch, I am 8Bishop. I'm going to be focusing on Legends of Runeterra content moving forward. And today we're going to go over the patch notes for 2.11. And boy is it a big one, because not only are they adding a mini expansion, but they are changing a ton of cards. And so we're going to take some time, we're going to talk about that, what I think, go from there. So, for those of you not keeping in the loop, they're adding a few new keywords, or, sorry, singular keyword. Some of this is more mechanics, because I guess predicting's already in the game, but there's new mechanics around the predicting a bit. So the lurk keyword is being added, which is when you attack while I'm on top of your deck, and I lurk, which grants all lurkers everywhere plus 1 attack, which is max once per round. There's also a champion that essentially does that twice over, so you can give 2 attack. I'm not going to talk too much about the new cards, unless they're listed in this update, though. This is going to be specifically just about what the patch notes are stating. I kind of read the overview already so that I can do the TLDR for you guys. So they're saying they want to target the top, but which they consider to be Irelia, Azir, Nasus Thresh, Trundle, Lysandra, and Draven decks, which is pretty accurate. But they want to make sure they're not just targeting the top and immediately allowing things to replace them as the top deck, and just cause power vacuums over and over and over. So they're trying to kind of rebalance in general, and they're doing that by focusing on region identities better, and they acknowledged, for example, that Targon shouldn't just be good at everything, it should have more pronounced weaknesses, and they're saying they may do things like make Ionia more flexible with combat tricks and recalling, and Bilgewater to do more incidental damage, or bigger bets for bigger payoffs. Which is all good. It's really important that regions have their identities, and you don't want them to step on each other's toes too frequently or too effectively. If a region, for example, Bilgewater, is very good at plundering, it's okay if you want to make plunder in another region, but it should be a worse version of plunder, or a more costly version, or something along those lines, than something that Bilgewater itself gets, because if not, then you would be taking away from a region's identity for no other purpose but to give plunder to a different region. And that's not to say that they're giving plunder to anything else right now. At this time, I don't think they're planning on doing plunder outside of Bilgewater, because that seems like a very pirate identity, and Bilgewater seems to be the very pirate-focused region. But yeah, so they find it very popular that all regions can perform. However, they're aware, some are going to perform better than others. It's just the natural cycle of a card game. You can't make every card as even as another unless you just don't have mechanics, right? Unless you're just making every card, this is a 1-1, this is a 2-2, this is a 3-3, and you're just comparing stats and nothing else. And every region has a fair amount of all of those things. But that wouldn't be fun. That wouldn't be good card design in any way. It's part of the game. But understanding when you need to make changes is great. And I'm glad they're finally making changes, because the last update I know a lot of people were unhappy with, because they were quite minor changes, and also not as many as people had expected to see. They also are getting onto... They have several card releases coming in the next few updates, because this update 2.11 is getting cards, 2.12 is getting cards, and then 2.14 is getting cards. And they tend to not want to do major updates when new cards are coming into play, citing that new cards often take the focus, and it's a little bit harder to track balance, but also people want to play with the new cards, so... I understand. I'm happy they're doing this anyway. They've acknowledged that it could result in some stuff being overtuned, because cards can change the dynamic of the metagame, and they say that they will be watching closely and potentially just doing an immediate follow-up update on 2.12 to fix things. So first things first, Miss Fortune gets a minor buff. Her level 2 is gaining Overwhelm. I think this is really good for Miss Fortune. It incentivizes you to actually attack with her. I don't know if this buff alone is enough to get Misfortune decks to see play, but that fish that they introduced in the new set that gives you free attacks, which happens to be in Bilgewater, is a really good tool enabler to help level her as well. And you should be able to attack with her. It feels really bad when you're playing a Misfortune deck and you want to watch your other units attack and never attack because you want to keep her damage in play. And you're more likely to attack with the level 2 because less blockers will survive. But when you add in the fact that she has that Overwhelm now, she's actually, threatening to be a finisher, and that might be enough for her to actually start seeing a little bit more play. Not necessarily tier 1 play, but I think this will push her up into a more secure spot, if nothing else, because leveling her will actually feel like a threat, even if you don't have a larger board to swing with at the time she's leveled. Jarvan is getting a buff. They are making it 1 point easier to level him. I don't hate this. I never personally found it too difficult to level Jarvan, but you did need to build your deck to be capable of it, often with units that have barrier or high health bodies for their costs. This lets you fit him into a few more decks than he would otherwise fit into, because you don't need to go as hard into his strategies. My only concern is those decks that are already good at leveling him are going to level him so consistently that I'm really worried that this one's actually going to lead to a lot of frustrating play, because having him be able to remove a unit with his Cataclysm every round can be a really frustrating play pattern for players. Shyvana does something similar, but Shyvana has to attack in order to do it. And yes, Shyvana can let other units do the fighting just like Jarvan can, but those units actually take the damage, and then if they survive the damage and they're dragons, they heal. While in Jarvan's case, it's a free attack action, which means you trigger attack abilities, which Shyvana's doesn't. And Jarvan himself, while challenging, will gain barrier at level 2. And that means he basically gets a free removal spell every single round. That can be really frustrating to play against. And don't get me wrong, I think Jarvan's design is really fun, and I'm interested to see where this goes. I am concerned that the buff may have overtuned him, because in those matchups where someone already is successfully leveling Jarvan, it's one of the most frustrating things to play against if you don't have removal for Jarvan. May end up being completely okay. Honestly, only time will tell on this one, but to be fair, I think Demacia needs a little bit more love as an overall faction, especially if they end up hitting the Cytheria combo. Not that Demacia is super important in that combo, besides Cytheria, but they have reworked Tryndamere back into having tough. For those of you that don't remember, Tryndamere used to have tough at level 2, and they actually nerfed that away from him because removing him was incredibly frustrating. I think this is actually fine to revert. I think one of the biggest factors for this is that at the time they took this away from him, the primary way you'd be removing creatures, or not creatures, but just units in general, the primary way you'd be removing people was through damage. There were a couple other things that you could do, especially if you were in a more controlling deck. You might actually have some of the hard removal that was just kill anything. But there weren't a lot of those, and as the game has grown, we've gotten a lot more cards that do high damage numbers. We've gotten a lot more cards that just remove. Targon can just completely obliterate things pretty consistently, even when you have to invoke and gamble for said thing. Having a lot more silences in the game that can actually hit champions gives you that round where you can get rid of the tough if he happened to make it to the level in the first place. But Trinimer's also just not as strong as he was back then. You can hush him when he swings, expecting to just be safe to level, and now you get to trade a 4/4 into this 8/4, not take the overwhelm damage because he's hushed, and then he no longer levels up. So I think when he gets his level up, it's deserved, especially because a lot of Tryndamere's strength and flavor has to do with the fact he doesn't die the first time, and he loses a lot of his threat potential once he's already been leveled, and you can't unlevel a champion. So I think the tough was actually pretty important to give him the toughness he's known for. And I'm glad to see it back. I think when they took it, it was the right call, and I think returning it is the right call. They've also reverted Karma. Karma used to be a 5-mana card. I think this might be a hot take. I think this revert is fine. I know a lot of people don't like playing against Karma. I know Karma combo decks can be really frustrating, but at the end of the day, she doesn't get played until she levels most of the time anyway. You're not going to see her come down on 5. You're going to see her come down on 10 or later. And that 1 mana difference may enable an extra spell or a stronger spell than you would like on the turn she comes down. But it really only affects the first turn she's been played because of the nature of how Karma is played. So I think this more opens up people that want to play a level 1 Karma and generate the card advantage from her, which I think is really fun. And early in the game, I loved playing with Karma decks and generating card advantage with her. It just wasn't the correct way of playing her typically, because her level 2 is so potent that card advantage just wasn't worth risking her dying, because you need those copies for all the combo things. I don't think this is going to change how people play Karma at all. I think they're going to keep playing it as a combo deck, but I'm hoping that it encourages some people to play her the way she used to be played at the beginning, where some people would occasionally play her to generate the card advantage, because getting a random spell from your regions every single round is very, very, very strong card advantage, and if this effect weren't as powerful as it was, this effect would be why you play Karma. And honestly, if they were to change Karma entirely because of the combo being the combo potential being so brutal, and just let her keep this effect on her level 2, and then give her level 2 something else, like anytime you cast a spell, gain +1/+1, whether it's permanent or for turn, just anything like that. I think she'd actually still be playable, and that would actually result in people not holding her for the entire game necessarily. I think they would have to change her level requirements away from Enlightened if they were to completely change this card, though. But that's a completely different talk. Back to the point, I don't think that this change from 6 mana back to 5 mana is a problem. I know mana can be a major factor, and I know that when it was applied to Lee Sin, it made a big difference. But Lee Sin decks didn't want to hold him until they hit Enlightened. Lee Sin decks wanted to play him as fast as possible, as long as they could get the spells up for him to do his thing, and a lot of the time you had cheap enough spells that you could just go with spell mana and playing Lee Sin to, at bare minimum, give him Challenger and Barrier, which is enough to do things for a turn, even if he wasn't fully leveled. Enlightened makes all the difference here. That level up requirement, the cost, it's fine. I really think it's a minor nerf. She now needs 14 allies to have attacked. Honestly, I'm okay with this being a smaller nerf for now. I know Irelia Azir is very frustrating to play against, and I think a lot of that frustration really has to come down to with feeling like you're always on the defensive, and so far, looks like that's still the case. Hopefully we see more changes to that. I don't think Irelia leveling too soon was actually the issue, even though a leveled Irelia that's played correctly can completely blow you out of the game, because she can let the big things that you're chump blocking just not be chump blocked. So this will slow down some of the cheesy wins that Irelia Azir can get. It's not going to slow down them beating you down with 1/1s at this time, but we're only in Champions. Maybe there's more stuff to be affected. We'll see. Riven's getting a minor buff. I always thought that this is how it should work, so I'm pretty happy to see this. I'll admit I wasn't playing when she came out on release. I came back on and off from Runeterra. I played a lot during the beta, and I took some time off, and then I would come and play like a couple casuals, so on and so forth. But I didn't start playing it more seriously again until pretty recently, just before the Irelia Azir patch. So she may have had this already and had it taken away. If she did, sorry, for being uninformed, I was unaware of that. But I definitely have always thought this is how it should work. The first time I played a Riven deck, I actually thought this was how it was going to function because I didn't read the effect fully. I just assumed it was going to be consistent wording for the card game, so I'm really glad to see this. I don't think Riven needed a giant buff, and this isn't a giant buff, this is just a consistency with how abilities similar to this work, and I'm very happy to see it because Riven should be able to reforge when she comes down into play during your opponent's turn. It lets her level a bit faster. I think that's completely acceptable to let her level a bit faster. Helps her continue to generate value. I think all that's really important for her. I think her body is already really good. 3-4 for 3 is insane. Leveling up, getting a 4 or 5 is so good. And now that leveling her is a bit more possible, and the fact that she herself can win you the game, especially because a Blade of Exile on her makes it very difficult to block her and actually trade with her unless you have removal. This will hopefully get her to see more play than just that Draven, Riven, OTK deck that she has a little bit of fringe play in, especially because she sees more play in that deck because of Draven than because of her. Okay, Heimerdinger is getting a buff. I am excited to see this. This is exactly the kind of buff I wanted for Heimerdinger. I understand why this buff took a while. The nerf had to come first. For those of you who don't know, his turrets at one point were much more frustrating to play against. As many of you who are current in the game know, level 3 spells aren't uncommon, and they're pretty good, and they enable things like Tri-Beam and Probulator. Well, Heimerdinger used to generate his elusive turret as a 3-1 on 3 mana plays. You could very easily play a Heimerdinger deck with a ton of spells and not much else. There wasn't even Tri-Beam at the time it was going on. I had a very competitive Heimerdinger deck that played him, a whole bunch of spells, and I'm blanking on her name, but the 9-drop that discards cards from your deck and burns for the amount of spells you have, and that was it. And just the elusive units you could consistently generate off of Heimerdinger were enough to win you most games. You could make a bunch of chump blockers with your spells, which would make you your actual turrets once you had Heimerdinger. You just played draw engines, token production, stuff to get to Heimerdinger and then get your turrets. And even if Heimerdinger could be removed as soon as he came down, if you could cast a couple level 3 spells, which at the time were fairly easy to do, even more so than they are now, even though there's more cards in the game, you would get a lot of value out of it because you would get a couple 3-1 elusives, which, unless you were fighting against elusives or a deck that had a lot of removal, they would really struggle to fight, and then you would just swarm them down with elusives. If you could protect your Heimerdinger, which the deck was designed to do, even for just an extra turn or two, you would completely just rush down your opponent. And they nerfed Heimerdinger, and they swapped his turrets, and they gave his fearsome turret the 3 cost and his elusive the 6 cost, which makes the elusives a little bit more dangerous, but a lot harder to get consistently, and you can't get a bunch of them in one turn anymore. The most you can ever get in a turn would be 2, unless you happen to play some cheesy card that was refilling spell mana, but without some crazy combo, the most you can play without any extra cards enabling you would be 2 of them, which was a lot more fair. But because of that, he lost a lot of his power, because while fearsome can be very dangerous, it's a lot easier for your opponent to just stumble into being able to block them, especially as the game progresses. They're going to have more big units. Not all decks do. Some decks are still going to struggle with fearsome. That's why fearsome aggro is still good. But I think the extra health was really important for Heimerdinger, because he no longer could guarantee generating enough threats the turn he was played, even if you wait till like turn 10 to play him, just because you're not going to have enough mana to generate a bunch of things that your opponent's generally going to be afraid of on turn 10. They can probably block fearsome if you're still alive. This makes it a lot more possible to play him on 5, have 3 spell mana up, be able to protect him, because there's not a lot of removal that's going to be able to shoot him for the 4 health damage up front. They're either going to have to invest their full turn in with like a Thermo, or they're going to have to use a couple removal spells, or at least actually interact with a unit in like a fight card. By no means is it going to make him impossible to handle, but that 1 health is going to make a huge difference. Because at least if you can generate a 2-for-1 trade, and let's be real, if you're playing Heimerdinger, it's going to be a 3-for-2 trade, where you are playing a card to protect him, and then they are playing an additional removal spell or counter spell. If it's not a counter spell, then it's not even a full 3-for-2, because you generate a turret off of whatever you're protecting him with, and then it's almost as if it was a 3-for-1 exchange. And that's what Heimerdinger players care about. They care about generating that card advantage. They care about beating you with the attrition of the turrets, and I think that's going to help him a lot. Definitely excited to try more Heimerdinger again and see how playable he is with the new health line. It may look really minor to you, but the difference between 3 and 4 health in Runeterra at this time is massive because of the amount of removal spells that burn for 3 and not for 4. Hecarim has been buffed from a 5-5 to a 5-6 and 6-6 to a 6-7. So this is a little bit of reverting. If I recall correctly, he used to have that exact stat line. He also used to have slightly stronger Spectral Riders, so this is a partial revert from a nerf. I think this is completely acceptable. I've never had an issue with Hecarim being alive for too long. It was never a matter of, I really wish this guy had less health so I could remove him because he's killing me across 3 turns. Hecarim was always, this is the big scary finisher. He comes down, he attacks, he's already leveling, he buffs all your units. I think he's still going to play like that. But that 1 extra health that they're giving back to him lets you throw him in a deck as a finisher that's not necessarily focusing on ephemeral, because he can survive just a little bit better, which is pretty important. I don't think he's going to see much play outside of a deck that wants him leveled when he comes down anyways, so I don't think this is going to make much change to him at all, because his attack stat is more what matters as a finisher than his health stat, and that hasn't been touched. But they're giving him a little bit more playability, and I appreciate that they're not over-tuning cards just to try to make them see play again. I don't think this alone is going to bring Hecarim back. If Hecarim's going to come back, it's because there's something else that makes him want to be played. But I don't think this is going to be an issue either. I don't think a player is going to get mad at Riot going, I can't believe you gave him 1 health at level 1 and at level 2. I can't beat Hecarim decks anymore, because they weren't an issue. They really weren't. I've only seen Hecarim a handful of times in the past, 3 months, and it was almost always, a meme tier deck being played against me that just enjoyed playing ephemeral units. Azir, getting a minor buff, you've summoned 13 units. Alright, I think it's still going to be really easy to level Azir. But I think this is more reasonable. I think this might slow down Aurelia Azir enough to make the deck feel more fair. And hear me out, because I know that sounds like a hot take. I understand the frustrating thing about Aurelia Azir is that you feel like you're always defending. And at this time, this far down the list, it sounds like you'll still always be defending. However, the thing that made Aurelia Azir really frustrating, there are 2 things. One is the units that generate power and health from units being played, because you just get these 1-drops that swing for incredibly high values that you get forced to chump block, and you're just losing cards and you're not gaining anything out of it, and they generate card advantage from you from that, which is really difficult. 2 is that when those 1/1s become 2/2s, you can no longer chump block them, even when it was a beneficial chump block, because you had a tough, or you had Frenzy or whatever it's called, where you get +1/+1 when you kill a unit. This 3-unit slowdown may be enough for you to stabilize against them more consistently for the deck to fall off. Because really, what it really Azir tries to do is it tries to beat you down before you can stabilize. And the only times it ever does it against me are when it gets an insane combo, which doesn't count. We're just talking about like just like a normal draw, right? So if they get a Dais early, it can be really, really hard to stabilize against them because they generate extra creatures, an extra poke, and when they get a leveled Azir really early, because that extra stat boost is really dangerous, not just from the Azir, but because they play a unit in the deck that can only buff units if you have leveled a champion, and Azir is so incredibly easy to level, especially for that deck. That extra 3 units doesn't sound like a lot, but that buys you an entire, like, Blade Dance and a half, right? Like, with the exception of their Blade Dance cards that cost 5 or more, not a single Blade Dance card is going to make up this difference anymore. They're going to have to invest at least a little bit more heavily. And I know they could recall with the Blade Dance card, play that Blade Dance card, and then play the unit from it, and that does technically generate the 3. But you're talking about needing to spend 3 mana on the recall / Blade Dance, and then whatever mana cost the recalled unit is to make up that difference, which is a huge difference in just economy for the deck. Too soon to tell. There's still a lot of things that we need to look at. Droplet still gives them a ton of card advantage, and that could still be really dangerous. Honestly, I don't think Droplet's too big of a concern in Aurelia Azir. They have had turns where they completely go off with me, but it's a build-around card, and I think it's relatively fair because it's a build-around card. I don't want to take it away from Ionia because I think it's a good tool for Ionia. I think if they're going to hit units later on on the list, I want to see something like the Mentor of the Meek. Gain stats less reliably, like not gain health, or gain it for every 2 units, or go up a cost, like make it a 2-drop. And sure, that doesn't sound like a lot, but man, slowing them down by 1 turn, especially because they could protect it and then immediately replay it again with a bunch of their cards, and now that extra mana just takes away from their resources that much more, would make a huge, huge difference to that card. And I don't think it would hurt Ionia as a faction too much to nerf Mentor of the Meek by making him a 2-mana card. The biggest nerf to that actually would be that their Allegiance thing that pulls 1-drops wouldn't hit him anymore, which would hurt that specific strategy. But I think it's okay to do that, especially if they want to just make more 1-drops for Ionia. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing a 1-drop that functions more uniquely, where it fits more into that package, and you would belong in that 1-drop Allegiance package, and just let that Mentor get nerfed. That's the tangent, though, because we were on Azir. TLDR and my giant rant. I think this nerf is probably enough for now. I'm happy that they're doing small nerfs instead of big nerfs, and it's important for game design to not nerf things into oblivion, because when you nerf a card, it has this cascading effect that dramatically affects the game more than you can ever expect. It's kind of like the butterfly effect with, like, time traveling, where, you know, you step on a butterfly and you go to the future kind of thing, or, like, if you've seen the movie, just, like, you make a small change, and it can cause huge changes as you go down the line. This doesn't just affect Aurelia Azir, right? It affects everything Azir's in. This affects Mono Shuruma, because Azir's the preferred unit for Ascending. So there are other things they're nerfing by nerfing this. And the same thing goes for, like, the Irelia nerf. It's minor, but there's 2 minor nerfs on both of their champions. That's a big deal. And even if it just decreases the play rate of this deck by 10% and the deck still performs very similar, if the play rate decreases by 10%, that's going to make the frustration around the decks significantly lower, because it's going to bring it below the 50% played margin, and now you don't have to feel quite as badly about going into queue with a deck that's not as good against them. So even if you think that the changes should have been more extreme, feel it out first. Don't assume a small nerf is insignificant. It's surprising how often something like a 1-cost change or a 1-point stat change makes a huge difference in a card game, especially when a lot of things are being changed all at the same time. Nasus, minor nerf, no longer has Fearsome at level 1. This is an interesting nerf. My issue with Nasus has never been, I can't chump block this. My issue with Nasus has always been, if I chump block this, but I don't change his stats, I lose the game. Because once he gets that spell shield online, he becomes so hard to deal with. Honestly, I'm unsure this is going to change their deck in any meaningful way, aside from the fact that occasionally they might be able to scam a win from you by grabbing your 1/3 attack person with Thresh and then pulling an Nasus out, and you can't block the Nasus. That happens occasionally. It doesn't happen frequently enough for that to be a point of frustration for me personally. I understand some people really hate that, though, so that's gone for you guys unless he's already leveled. I think his spell shield at level 2 is what makes him so terrifying and what makes it such a hard play matchup, because if you don't have the removal beforehand, you've probably already lost. And Frostbite and stuff will still stall him out. That didn't change. The Frostbite doesn't interact with the Fearsome in any way anyways. This will change a fringe amount of play. Something, if I had to make an arbitrary guess, something like 5 to 10% of the matches where they would win specifically by pulling an Nasus while grabbing the only thing that can block it, or the only things that can block it. It has fixed that one issue. It has not made Nasus less terrifying. It has not made that deck less good. It has taken away one pseudo win condition, but essentially just slowed them down. Once again, though, never underestimate minor changes. I don't think this is enough to make Nasus stop seeing play. I think Nasus is still going to be played plenty. Is this enough for people to be less frustrated with Nasus? Only time will tell. I personally think this is still going to be one of my more frustrating matchups if I'm playing a deck that's bad against it. But honestly, of the top-end decks that they've listed, the Irelia Azir, the Draven decks, the Thresh Nasus, and the TLC, Nasus actually bothers me the least of those decks. Yeah, they go off quite frequently because they have a lot of draw cards, and they can be quite frustrating to play against. But if you have any Frostbite, you can buy so much time against Nasus. If you have any hard removal, and they don't have the counter up, or you have counters for their counters, you can deal with Nasus. It's not an insanely fast deck, which makes it feel more fair. They're not beating you on turn 3, they're beating you on turn 5, 6, 7, 8, and 5 is really, really, difficult for them to do. 5 is them playing... I don't even think it can technically do it on 5, honestly, because 5 would be them playing their Thresh, leveling it before it attacks somehow, so I guess 6 is more accurate. They would be playing a Thresh on 5 when you have the attack token, attacking you on 6, pulling a Nasus, and that would be, the nuts for them, the absolute nuts, and you would have to have absolutely nothing out, and if you traded with their entire battlefield and had nothing out immediately after they played a Thresh, you kind of asked for it. So, of the higher-end decks, I think that this deck is honestly one of the more fair decks. Some of their units are more frustrating, honestly, than the champions themselves, because they have some quite overstated units in Shruma at this time, especially with the amount of things that have fearsome. But yeah, nothing crazy here. I think he's still going to see plenty of play. I think people will be happy that the keyword is gone when it comes up, and will forget that he even had it when it doesn't. Sivir gets a 5-point buff. This is freaking huge. Sivir may not see a lot of play right now, but I've actually been playing a deck that uses Sivir, and she is insanely strong because of this right here, Spell Shield. Like I was saying about the level 2 Nasus, Spell Shield is insane. She's a little bit more fair to play around the Spell Shield of because of this health line right here, because if you just have anything to ping her with, followed by most of the removal cards in the game, you can answer the Sivir. However, if you can't answer this, when she comes down, which a lot of people don't save mana for 2 removal spells on 4, she's often going to get at least 1 hit on you, sometimes even 2, and that already gets her a third of the way to leveling, even if you had nothing else to do anything. And a lot of people don't realize this, but this damage is like it is any damage. It can be effect damage. I'm playing her with Freljord, and I have AoEs, and you play an AoE card, and you burn your opponent's field for 2 for everything. You have like 2 units out. They have 2 units out. You just got 8 points on her right there. Just playing a removal card you would have played anyway. I honestly don't struggle to level her in the decks I play her in. And that extra 5 points is just going to give her so much more consistency for winning you the game, because if you play her down and she's already leveled, it becomes incredibly difficult to remove her the turn she's come down, because now you need to pop her Spell Shield and have 4 damage. And like I was saying earlier in the video, the difference between 1 health when it's a 3 and 4 health comparison is massive in this game. Talia is getting a buff. Talia is no longer dependent on having a landmark for her attack ability. I think this might actually make Talia playable. I still don't think she's the best champion by any means, but the worst thing about Talia was you needed to play landmarks that stayed out for a long time, or forever, for her to feel good. And a lot of times you didn't necessarily even want those landmarks. You were playing them because you want to enable your Talia. Now you can play Talia kind of the way it feels like she's meant to be played, where you generate a bunch of units off of your landmarks. You copy the things that generate bigger units. And yeah, sure, you can still play her in the Thrall deck. But I thought she was the worst card in the Thrall deck because she was a little bit lackluster, because you're trying to pop those Thralls as much as possible. And once you have a bunch of those 8/8s, she doesn't do anything. And now she does. And I think that means she's going to see more play. She's going to be more relevant and see more play in the Thrall decks than as like a one-of that she was seeing. I think that she's going to actually be a bigger threat as a finisher. And as a whole, I'm pretty happy with this change. I'm interested to try some decks with her now. I was considering doing a Targon deck with her and giving her Overwhelm, and just now that I can guarantee the 3 stack on the 2 damage when I attack with her, I'm pretty excited to see how this goes. It is possible this is an overtune, because in those matchups, when a Talia deck went off, it could feel really bad. It just happened to be that it wasn't something that would happen very consistently, because of that need of always having a landmark out, and they could just run out of landmarks to play, or not have the right timing on their landmarks because they played it during your turn and it popped during theirs, and so on and so forth. And though I think the worst case scenario for this is it actually overtunes the Talia, and then they'll do one of 2 things. I predict if she ends up being overtuned, they'll either revert her health back from the +1/+1 they gave her last patch, or they will change this from 3 times to 2 times, which is still considerable removal, because it means she's always swinging for 8 as a 5-drop. That's incredibly high damage. It still makes her very hard to trade with for most units at that point in the game, but it makes it to where you're a little bit less likely to be forced to trade too far down, because a 6-drop unit will actually survive blocking her most of the time in order to deal damage back. I think for now, though, this is fine. We'll see if it ends up being too frustrating. I'm happy to see it. I think if they didn't do this, Talia was going to see even less play with the new champions coming in the game. But by doing this, there's hope for her to see play somewhere, even if it's still fringe play. Taric getting a buff. He's getting +1 health. Once again, man, that 1 health, we were just talking about that. I think that's huge. That is absolutely massive. And the reason this is massive is that 1 health, a lot of the time, that's a 2 health buff. Because when you attack with Taric, he always has tough as a level 1. And a lot of time, that's enough when you have the health to back it up. It's unlikely when you play him on turn 4, if you play him on curve, especially if you're on the attack token, it's very unlikely your opponent is going to have something with 5 attack in the first place, but now they need something with at least 6 attack in order to trade with it if he gets that tough trigger up. And that's assuming you're not buffing his health and sharing that buff with his support unit and so on and so forth. I don't know if this is enough for him to see more than fringe play, but this does make him more playable. And I'm excited because I have been trying to make a Taric deck work, and there's a fine line for that because you don't want Taric to become too good. If it's an insanely consistent deck, it's going to be too frustrating to play against because people get more frustrated by things that they feel like there's no answer than anything else, and the fact that that once he's leveled, he says, you know, me and my ally can't die. Essentially every other turn, as long as they continue open attacking and only like playing burst speed things before they're open attacking, they can guarantee 2 units are just constantly swinging in on you, and that can have a very bad feel to play against as an opponent. But you have to work for it enough that right now it seems pretty fair. It's really just that balancing act, and I think that's really important. I'll be right back, but I'll probably just edit out this right back. I'm going to let my dog outside. I hope that we see some other cards that actually, I hope we see some other cards that help the Taric archetype a bit more. They're talking about giving Targon more identity. If they give Targon more of a support identity and take away somewhere else, this may be relevant. And I'm interested to see where it goes. Aphelios, he is also getting a health buff by +1. I think this is actually, I think this is really good. I wasn't playing at the time, but I know that Aphelios haunted the meta when his weapons cost 2. Now that they cost 3, the only times it really felt good to play Aphelios is if you were playing him with someone that wanted you to generate cards. And all of those were pretty fringe play things. You can play with Heimerdinger and make some turrets, and the 3-drop turrets are a lot better than the 2-drop turrets unless you happen to need the tough effect like against Aurelia Azir. But Heimerdinger doesn't see a lot of play right now. Now, between the Heimerdinger buff and this, maybe it will. Same thing goes, you could play him with Victor, because both like to create cards, and if you have them both out and leveled, you can actually get really, really mean weapon discounts and still have a pretty big threat. But part of the problem is that there aren't a lot of ways of generating these moon weapons. You have the one champion spell that you could add to your deck, and you have Aphelios. And that 2 health made it to where almost every removal spell in the game could kill Aphelios. Taking away a handful of removal options, I think is a big, big deal. And I think it's really important that they did this. I don't know if it's enough to make him become a higher tier champion again, but this may give him the extra turn he needs on a more regular basis to generate that extra weapon and actually level up. And once he levels, he becomes incredibly dangerous because you get that 2 cost for your weapons, and you get the guaranteed generation at round start if your hand doesn't already have one. I really like this buff. I think that they're doing a good job of not overcorrecting. I'm really glad they didn't change the weapon cost, but I am happy to see that they acknowledge that he is not in a good place right now, because the low health combined with the high weapon cost was preventing him from seeing play in a significant way, in my opinion. This is a very interesting thing. Make It Rain had its nerf reverted. Make It Rain is an insanely powerful card. This change right here, anyone who did not play when Make It Rain cost 2 will not understand how prominent this card was and how play around this card was. This change might make Bilgewater that much more playable, actually. And I'm not even talking about including the new cards. Make It Rain at 2 mana is incredibly powerful because you always hit different targets, which means if your opponent has exactly 2 units, you are guaranteed to hit those 2 units. You put 1 powder keg out, and you are guaranteed, if your opponent can't remove the keg out, obviously, to do 2 to 2 creatures and opponent's face for 2 damage. But even the 1 damage pings at 2 mana devastates Irelia Azir. Devastates them. That is a turn earlier that you can ping their stuff for 1 apiece. When Irelia Azir do not get insane draws, how often is it that they do something like Droplet on 1, and then another thing with 1 health on 2, and then you go Make It Rain and you kill both of them before they do anything? And the odds that they can recall are okay, but they're not going to be able to recall and then play a thing, because the Droplet would have net them 1 mana. And that's it. No, they probably won't even be a recall. What am I talking about? Yeah, they would only have 1 spell mana if they played a 2-drop. They would, and very few Irelia Azir decks are playing the 1 mana recall spell. Unlikely they'd even be able to recall. You would just remove their engine. This also really hurts Thresh Nashus. They have a lot of 1 health units, and they have a lot of 2 health units on the early end of the curve, and being able to ping for 1 and or 2, because it's not hard to get powder kegs, especially when you have an incentive like having a 2-cost Make It Rain to put powder kegs in your deck again. This is massive. This right here may actually change the format and push us more into a mid-range to controlling format, because this shuts down aggressive decks very, very, very hard. If Bilgewater isn't popular and this doesn't see much play, aggro decks will be okay. If Bilgewater sees a lot of play, and at least for now, because Lurk is the big hot new mechanic, I think it's going to see a ton of play because it's the fun-looking thing to do. This is see a lot of play. And also, I think this would be a pretty good counter against Lurk, because a lot of Lurkers have low health, and that's part of like the risk-reward of playing Lurkers. And this being able to actually ping down Lurkers, even if it takes 2 Make It Rains or a Powder Keg first, is going to be a big deal, because that's going to be a popular deck, at least early on, just because it's new, and new decks just blow up. We'll see how this goes. This could be too meta-defining. They might actually revert this one. Right now, of everything that may or may not be reverted, this is my prediction for most likely to be reverted, because not only did this card make a huge difference to how people played the format beforehand, but this card hurts so many early champions, but does aggro decks. Teemo loses to Make It Rain. Zoe loses to Make It Rain. Fizz, no one's really playing Fizz, but Fizz loses to Make It Rain. Also, interesting that Fizz kind of slipped through the cracks. That's unfortunate. definitely think Fizz could have used a little bit of help, even if it was just make him a 2/2 at level 1. Especially knowing that Make It Rain is making a comeback. They should have anticipated that, and I think they should have given Fizz the extra health. I think it's okay for Zoe and Teemo to lose to things like this because they're kind of high-risk, high-reward cards because either of them can single-handedly win you the game if your opponent doesn't deal with them. Fizz is a little bit more fair, though. He doesn't just win you the game. It takes a while for him to get on board, and playing sharks and removing people's stuff with sharks is a really slow-rolling thing, especially because you've already attacked. It doesn't rally or anything. It's a little counterintuitive to his strategy. It's one of the reasons he's a little unimpressive. The most dangerous thing about Fizz is that you can just make him hard to block every turn if you keep playing spells. So yeah, I will say that I didn't actively think about it beforehand, but what immediately comes to mind is I really wish Fizz had gotten a buff. Just that 1 health may have even been enough. I think that he honestly needs a rework to be a more interesting character because those high-risk, high-reward champs are supposed to pay off more when they're 1-drops, and his payoff doesn't feel worth it. I think when the metagame has a lot of single-target removal, he can feel really strong, and at those times he can shine a little bit. But even then, if your opponent's playing correctly, they just ignore him, and they keep everything else you play at bay, and he normally can't get there on his own. So, yeah. Missed opportunity. I think Fizz could have used it, especially knowing that you did this, guys. If this goes back to 3, don't be surprised. This is also, notably, another buff for Misfortune, because that means Misfortune's champion spell is now 2 mana instead of 3. Between that and the Overwhelm, I think Misfortune's definitely going to see play. Make It Rain is such a strong card, especially if you're worried about aggression in the format, that I think even if they hadn't buffed Misfortune's level 2, she would return to play the 4th and 5th copy of Make It Rains. And, you know, hypothetically 6th, 7th, and 8th if you keep her alive and keep drawing her. Black Market Merchant. They have buffed him back up to 2 health. I'm okay with this buff. They only nerfed him because Nab was frustrating to play against. They didn't change his effect in any way when they made this nerf. They just made it a little bit easier to kill. But only a handful of cards care about doing 1 damage. Most removal already did at least 2. So I'm happy with that. They did actually protect him from the Make It Rains. I wish they'd done it for Fizz as well. I'm happy. I enjoy plundering as a mechanic. And I think it's important that plunder is at least kind of relevant because some of the newer cards look like they may be countered by plunder. If this is the only change they've made to plunder, I don't think plunder is going to blow up in any way. But it's nice to see him with the 2 health, especially because in those worst matchups where you're like against Aurelia Azir and you need to get a blocker down, he might actually be able to block a sword now and then still exist for a turn, which is massive against a deck that, you know, is trying to chip you down 1 image at a time. Double Up getting buffed to a 5-drop. I might be misremembering, but I think this might have actually been one of the cards that used to cost 5, and then they increase its cost. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm fine with this costing 5, honestly. 2 to an enemy that can do 4 to face if it kills it is honestly pretty fair for 5 mana, especially when this is kind of Bilgewater identity, like they're saying. They want incidental damage, and this lets Bilgewater do their incidental damage a bit better. Especially, they have Monster Harpoon, which was competing for the 6-drop spot. That gets, and it can be discounted to 3 mana. And now you can kind of do a little bit of a nifty thing where if you have 8 mana, you can ping off a smaller thing, and then use the Monster Harpoon to ping off a bigger thing, which is pretty cool. This might see a little bit of play now, like as more of a finisher. I saw it in decks occasionally when people were fooling around with Bilgewater, but this synergizes really well with Gangplank, especially once he's leveled up and generates barrels for you every turn, the extra point of damage both to unit and to Nexus is massive. I think Double Up will see play. I don't think it will see a lot of play, but I think it will see some. Slotbot is getting a really, really interesting buff here. Slotbot has gone from his normal round start, getting his plus health, to round start, or when he's played, reference the last turn. I really like this change. I am concerned that it's going to make Slotbot go off too consistently, but it is literally a gamble mechanic. And because it's a gamble mechanic, it might end up being okay, because you can't control where those stats distribute, and you can get really, really bad rolls and just have them removed. This at least makes it to where you get to have him in play and not feel bad about it. Because a lot of the time, if you wanted to play a Slotbot, you had to wait until the turn was mostly played out. You need to have already drawn a bunch of cards. Then you wanted to make sure your opponent was unlikely to be able to deal 4 damage, and then you would play the Slotbot. And then hopefully you would roll okay enough that you weren't punished for playing this super late in the game, because you would want at least a handful of spell mana plus some extra mana to get some draws up. Now the fact that you can do some drawing and stuff the turn before, hit a Slotbot, and play a Slotbot, it's going to feel pretty good. Top decking a Slotbot while looking for an answer won't feel as bad as it used to when you're like, wow, I just played all my draw spells. Now I don't get to buff my Slotbot. Now he cares that you played those draw spells, even if you can't afford him this turn. You can play him next turn, he'll still get the health. Even crazier is that means you can have these big draw turns, draw a whole bunch of cards, and the following round drop a couple Slotbots, get these really big health bodies, and then hopefully get a couple good rolls and do some crazy things with them. This might make a Casino deck somewhat playable. You're always going to be gambling when you're running a Slotbot, because there are always going to be those instances where he has a massive stat distribution, but still doesn't give you any health or any attack, and either of those things can just lose you a game. Because if you don't have enough health to safely attack or not be removed, or not enough attack to do anything meaningful with it in a turn, it can really, really be bad. It's possible this is overtuned, but I think because of the random nature behind it, it's gonna be okay. Yeah, my biggest concern is just that the more random this game gets, the less people who've moved to this game enjoy it, because people who play Legends of Runeterra often state they moved to this game from things like Hearthstone, because Hearthstone had too much RNG involved. And I think a little bit of RNG in the game, like Slotbot, is completely fine, and it's flavorful, and Bilgewater kind of likes to gamble as a mechanic. You just don't want to see too much of it. And as long as we don't see too much of it, I think we're going to be okay. But I am concerned that if they continue printing a lot of RNG cards as expansions come out, like they printed the new Rise of the Underworld card that replaces your entire deck with Enter the Beyonds, which is RNG, but it's RNG where you're gambling for win cons. And I think that card is actually better than people think, and I think it might see play, because you can play it as a finisher. You can play a normal deck, and you don't play that card until you've maxed out on mana, and then you're fine. If you can play a single invoke card every single turn, look how good Aurelian Soul is, even if it's not leveled. Generating that one card every turn is really hard to stop Aurelian Soul. I think it's going to feel very similar to that. And it's possible you have things that make it cheaper at that point. And that's the bad kind of RNG to play against. Slotbot, I think, is a little bit less likely to upset your opponents. People hate Targon, and a lot of the reason for that is the invoke mechanic. Lowering the cost of Shyvana's champion spell to 2. I think this is completely okay. This will make that deck a little bit better at removing your stuff, but let's be honest, that's the one thing Shyvana decks already do really well, and I think it's okay for them to do it a little bit better. A lot of the time, she's curving out, and you already have her buddy challenging units anyway. If she's leveled, she's already able to fight units and remove them that way anyways. It might actually cause Confront to see a little bit of play in other decks besides just being a champion spell at 2 mana. At 3 mana, I don't think anyone's playing it, and I don't think anyone would play it. At least at 2, there's some merit to it, you know? You play it, you can play this with the Jarvan deck, which has been buffed. Use it to give the unit that the first time it challenges gets barrier. It means you don't have to commit to elites to be able to give him challenger. You can just give him this, and that between this and the guy that can give an ally challenger, you probably have enough cards that can do it. Yeah, I think Jarvan decks might actually be in a better place because of this buff as well. I don't think it's going to affect Shyvana decks very often. It's pretty rare that someone plays this against me with the Shyvana deck, and when they do, it's normally on like a really late game huge dragon, and the 1 mana difference rarely mattered. But I think this is going to help Jarvan, and it might help something else I'm not thinking about